A very warm welcome, everyone, to this exciting panel on re-envisioning research on research for higher education. I trust everybody's connected by now. My name is Janja Komljenovic. I'm a lecturer of higher education at Lancaster University, and I'm also an active member of the CGHE. And it's my great pleasure to chair this panel today of wonderful and excellent researchers and scholars. So the speakers will introduce the new CGHE project on with the title on the topic of the research function and mission of higher education. And they will also locate it within the wider research on research conducted by the project team. The project draws together a multidisciplinary scholarship and a strong comparative dimension in order to study the importance of the research function in understanding the dynamics of higher education. The project explores research assessment systems, organizational practices that shape the weight and value given to academic research, and individual perspectives on the importance and the recognition of research in higher education. So we have a wonderful set of speakers who are working on this project. First is Oancea from University of Oxford. She's a professor of philosophy of education and research policy and leads the CGHE Project 3 with the title, The Role of Research in Higher Education and Research Assessment. Then we have Gemma Derrick from Lancaster University. She's a senior lecturer in the Department of Educational Research, and she also works on the same project. And then we have James Robson from University of Oxford, and he's looking at the role of research in higher education and research assessment. He's a departmental lecturer in higher education at Oxford and a deputy director of the Center for Skills, Knowledge and Organizational Performance. And at the end, we have Xin Xu, who is a research fellow at the CGHE Center and works at the Department of Education at Oxford, is a junior research fellow at Kellogg College and works on this project. So an excellent research team. How we'll run this session is that the speakers will talk for 30 minutes. In fact, they have a very interesting setting of engaging with the audience. So you'll all have an opportunity to intervene and interact with the speakers. And then at the end, hopefully, we'll have a short time session with an opportunity for a more classical questions and answers session. But I should also say that after this session, there will be a breakout room where you are most welcome to continue discussing things from this panel. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat area right from the start of this session. I will monitor the area and then prepare a list of speakers at the end. So the sooner you ask a question, the greater the chance that you'll be asked to speak. But without further ado, I will just hand over to Alice and the team will take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Janja, and it's great to see so many people in the room. It's already been a very full day of conference, and I'm buzzing with ideas and questions. So in this 40 minutes or so session, my colleagues Gemma, Xin, James, and I will introduce a new project which started in October 2020 as part of the Center for Global Higher Education. Would you mind sharing the slides, please? Thank you. I'm waiting for control of the slides. Thank you very much. So this, as Janja explained, this three-year project is multidisciplinary and it deliberately tries to cut across different disciplines and to adopt a comparative perspective internationally and institutionally in order to focus on the importance of the research function in understanding the wider dynamics of higher education. But ultimately, we aim to mobilize this knowledge base and in order to ask broader and more critical questions about the structures, practices, discourses shaping higher education-based research and research careers, about the dynamics of homogenization, stratification, and competition, or indeed of diversity, equity, and collaboration in research systems around the world. We also want to ask, ultimately, to what extent research assessment may become a formative, communicable, equitable, epistemically sound and morally defensible activity, and whether research and its contributions can be reimagined in ways that rebalance intrinsic and extrinsic interpretations of value, that recognize fully and support structurally the epistemic value of diversity and more equitable global dynamics of knowledge creation and sharing, and that nurture a symbiotic relationship between freedom and responsibility. We will use the time for this session to introduce the project and share with you our research questions, our design, as well as some of the key challenges that we're either confronting now or we envisage as the project unfolds. We'll try to spend some time during the session engaging in collaborative knowledge building with you, and we very much hope that you will respond positively to our invitation. So several times during the session we will pause and we will invite you via the chat function to contribute through to the discussion. And we think that you may recognize the challenges that we're facing from your own work. And we very much hope that you will be willing to share with us your knowledge, your experience, and your advice in terms of how to respond to them, or indeed how best to reframe them. Towards the end of the session, we also hope to share with you outcomes from our wider research on research, both by members of the project team, but also by the excellent doctoral researchers who work with us on their projects. We adopt a layered approach to this study, and we consider structures, policy, values and discourses, organizational environments and relationships, careers and experiences, as well as research evaluation and funding, all at emergent, global, system, organizational and individual levels. And we'll talk you during this session through the different strands of the project. Starting with the selection of sites within which we are going to base the exploration of those questions. Now, the criteria behind the choice of sites had to do with identifying systems where there is a formalized research assessment system, but we wanted to have a combination of systems that have been established for a long time and systems that were introduced more recently, and also a combination of systems that have established mechanisms that already have circulated around the world, and other systems that are attempting to introduce different and more contextualized ways of looking at research. And the intention being that once we've explored those issues in those contexts and also developed an instrument for future research and potentially for a future larger survey, then we would be in a position to engage, pilot, discuss with colleagues from other parts of the world as well, and develop it further. So on the research assessment or the system level strand, we're asking what the purposes are, the features, the mechanisms, governance, embeddedness, buy-in, use, outcomes and challenges of research assessment frameworks used in performance-related research funding in the 6 countries that I've just shown you on the map. And in addition, we also want to understand how research assessment frameworks have developed and have circulated internationally and over time, and also how research assessment relates to system-level priorities and definitions of research excellence. To do so, we've adopted a combined approach, which combines comparative policy analysis, interviews in the 6 settings, with analysis of outcomes from system-level assessments and bibliometric analysis. And some of this work has already started. We have started work on the comparative policy analysis. And my colleagues, Xin and Gemma, will talk you through where we are and what we plan to do in this particular strand. Xin?
Thank you, Alice. So for the comparative policy analysis, we have completed the first phase of the systematic mapping of the policy documents at the 6 systems that we identified as the case systems. As shown in the table on this page, in the first phase, we have visited the official councils for institutions, websites, and downloaded all the policy documents relevant to the most recent round of research assessment exercises. For the UK, Italy, and Hong Kong, the outcomes for the latest rounds are still waiting. As you can see, we have also briefly noted the historical developments of those research assessment frameworks in the 6 systems. And the first rounds all started before or in 2010, with the earliest being the UK in the late 1980s. And in the second phase of the comparative policy analysis, we'll collect the historical documents for a longitudinal comparative analysis as well. There are a few things to note about the mapping in this phase. So for the language, among all the 6 systems, we relied on the English websites and documents for Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. But for Hong Kong, Norway, and Italy, the websites or documents were either in English or bilingual or in the local language. While there are some websites that have English versions, we found that the English websites contains much fewer documents or information as compared to those in the local languages. Therefore, we have harvested all the documents from both the English and local language websites and collected documents in different languages, and those documents will be translated before analysis. There are arguably several limitations in the first phase of this data collection. For instance, some documents may be outside the official websites that we relied on in this round. Some materials are interactive pages, so have not been downloaded. Also, some policies were replaced by later documents, but in this round, we have harvested all of them. But all the documents will be curated in the second phase. Also, for all the documents, we had initial categorization of all of them, but the categorization and classification of the documents will need to be double-checked. There's also this focus on the most recent round, which will be complemented by the historical analysis in the next stages. So here is a table of some preliminary findings from the first phase of the systematic mapping. In total, we have collected around 300 documents from the 6 systems. As you can see, there are far more documents collected from the UK RAF 2021 because, as mentioned, there were documents with revised editions, but all of them have been collected in this round. We have also classified the documents into different types, as you can also see in this table. For other systems, the majority of documents are guidance documents, but New Zealand is an exception because it has conducted comprehensive formal evaluation, and there are many formal evaluation documents of the exercise that are available. In terms of the language of the documents is mainly in English, but in Italy and Norway, there are more local language documents than the English ones. All of the documents, as I said, will be curated in the next stages for further analysis. So that's a brief summary of the comparative policy analysis. We'll talk about interviews later, and at this moment, I'll hand over to Gemma to explain the following approaches.
Thanks so much, Xin. Thanks, Alice. So this next approach is specifically to answer the research question, how does a research assessment relate to system levels, priorities, and definitions of research excellence? It is perhaps a bit of a fallacy that research excellence is a concept that reaches beyond borders and has a global base, but in fact, the definition, the practices associated with creating different forms of research excellence can be very much related to the context of on a national base, as well as linked to the performativity associated with with the audit framework, or the research audit framework under practice at that particular nation. What we are looking at is we're going to take analysis of the outcomes from system level assessments, and we've called this subjective assessment. So what this is the outcomes from the most recent audit exercises from the 6 nations under investigation, which for the UK will be 2021, as well as Hong Kong will be 2021 as well. Norway is in 2020, New Zealand in 2018, Italy in 2019, and Australia in 2018 as well. And we will be combining that with what we call an independent bibliometric analysis of research practice. And this will be looking at the publications associated with our case study institutions, and looking at a number of types of bibliometric indicators, including co-citations, collaborative collaborations or co-collaborative behaviors, networks of internationality, and their links to the particular nation and research institution under investigation. And what we're looking to do is to compare the outcomes from the audit frameworks with these bibliometric analyses, not necessarily to compare or to check the veracity of audit outcomes, or its or at least being to enter into debates about the peer review and production of subjective assessments with metrics-based associations. And these are the two debates which are prominent in the literature at the moment. But what we're looking at doing is by creating an overlay bibliometric analysis to basically understand the research differences and how they relate to the context of all of the nations under investigation. Xin, do you want to get to the next slide, please? Because I can't. So our main challenge is anticipated. So this is a little bit of a discussion that I will do before I open it up for a discussion around a challenge that we do face, is about the database selection. We have a preference for Scopus, mainly because we are dealing with different nations with different native languages. And in order to ensure that we get as large a coverage of the types of publications that each nation and each institution produces, but also to make sure that we get a sufficient language coverage and also being able to link co-citations across language barriers, we would prefer to adopt Scopus because it does seem to have a larger coverage and ability to map these multi-layered and in a way bilingual networks within research as well as different countries and fields as well. But specifically, we do need to require extra care. We need to look at the differences associated with staff coverage. In each of the nations under investigation, the audit frameworks have different rules about who is included in the audit and who isn't included in the audit. And when we are combining this with case studies and interviews associated with that case studies, we need to be clear about what it means to be an independent or auditable researcher within this context as well. We also need to be clear about comparing metric measurements of activity and practice with subjective associations of performance and excellence. And we have specifically used the words activity and practice, not used the word research performance, because we are very much interested in the contextual understanding of research excellence, rather than implying or overlaying an external idea about what research excellence is independent of that context, and therefore prefer not to look at performance as the word that we used there. We also need to make sure that there's a fair analysis across different appropriate levels of assessment, such as within research groups, between individuals, over journals, as well as general performance. And also, of course, as is quite dominant in the research on research community at the moment, it's extremely important that we practice as well as embed the principles of responsible research and evaluation into the way that we approach our research analysis as well. And for that sake, and for a way of stimulating some debate, which you can put into the chat function as well, if you can go to the next slide, Jen. would be, please share your thoughts about what you think the cultural understandings of what it means to be a researcher and how individual researchers should be counted in the assessment framework. What is your understanding about what constitutes accountable research in this audit framework? Is it independence? Is it reaching a certain threshold of performance? Please do share your understandings of this to inform our analysis in this section. Thanks, Alice.
Shall we give maybe 2 or 3 minutes for colleagues to start making a contribution there, and then we can engage with the content of the chat, please. So over to you, colleagues. I can see some of the people in the room thinking, there we go.
So Gerald asks, on the research conducted, are there any notes or weighting taken on the research type or scope, such as qualitative, in-depth, and quantitative, faster due to survey-based, or longitudinal versus cross-sectional type of research, or are they treated uniformly? For the sake of the bibliometric analysis, we are not actually looking at the content of each individual article. To do so would take a content analysis of tens of thousands of articles. So we're not actually looking at that. When we look at performance, it would be, there are ways in which we can control for these types of concerns about the content of the article, but we're not taking it into consideration for the purposes of our planned analysis, no. Lara Lalemi says, I think researchers should be judged based on how research integrates social justice and the impact on society. Yes, you're free. Yes, I do agree with that type of notion. Fortunately, both the UK and Australia as well have explicit criterion to look at societal impact and the measure of societal impact. Whether or not that is specifically linked to social justice issues is a moot point. But there are ways in which we can look at that as well. Alice, you might need to take over. I think my 6-year-old's coming up the stairs.
Thank you very much. And I can see that colleagues have started raising other issues in there. So beyond what counts as a researcher, into notions of subject-specific cultural issues that may be reflected in customs and practices, for example, in relation to authorship. And that may be actually a very important consideration for us. So thank you very much, Helen, for flagging that up. And also, we had a comment from Yusuf on going beyond numeric assessments and looking at us, including aspects of the ethics and ethicality, Yusuf calls it, of research. Also, the idea of open access may have different meanings and consequences and implications in different contexts. So that's again one important aspect to consider. I think our 2 minutes have gone for this particular task. We're very grateful to you for sharing your thoughts with us. Please continue to do so, and we'll have 2 other points over the next 10 minutes or so at which we'll invite you to contribute thoughts. So moving on to the second strand of the project, and I think James is going to come in and talk us through this one.
Thanks, Alice, and thanks for the great comments that are coming in. Xin, do you mind moving the slide forward by 1? Thank you. So I'm going to briefly discuss the second strand of the project, which focuses on the research function at the organisational level. And this aims to address the overarching research question of what are the factors, pressures and incentives that shape organisational structures, policies and practices concerning the role and value given to academic research. This holds together a number of key strands and foci, and will aim to unpack the intersecting relationships between national and institutional policies, organisational cultures, and how these relate to career structures at an organisational level. Therefore, as indicated here, we aim to operationalise this through these 3 sub-research questions, examining policies, strategies, and assessment at the organisational level. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. So we aim to address these questions through a case study approach, undertaking in-depth research in 12 institutions, 2 selected from each of the systems we're analysing. As organisational case studies, the unit of analysis sits at the organisational level, focused on organisational structures, policies and practices, and intersections that relate to conceptualisations and operationalisations of research and the value attached to it. A case study approach of this kind provides a bridge between macro system level analysis and micro individual level analysis, providing meso level understandings of the organisational context in which research policies and assessment frameworks are enacted and the institutional research structures that shape individual careers and professional experiences. In line with standard case study methodology, we plan to gather data in a range of different ways, triangulating our understandings of each organisational case across different methods. These include analysis of relevant documents related to organisational research policies and the way they are operationalised, as well as analysing organisations' digital profiles across a range of online spaces. Secondly, we will gather qualitative data through interviews with key stakeholders across the institutions, covering academic leaders, administrative and professional service staff, early and mid-career researchers, and representatives from partner organisations. And Xin will say more about this later. Thirdly, although the pandemic is clearly making this very challenging at the moment, we hope we may be able to visit the selected institutions over the next few years and conduct observations of relevant organisational activities. If COVID-19 prevents physical observations from taking place, we will aim to take an observational approach rooted in digital ethnography and map out and observe the ways in which research-related decisions are made and policies are enacted in the digital space. And finally, we'll undertake network mapping and bibliometric analysis, as Gemma has highlighted, to examine the ways in which organisational research structures and cultures are manifested in collaboration and publication patterns. However, before we can do any of this, we must first select our organisational cases. So for this strand, the selection of cases presents the biggest challenge. The aim is to ensure that we have a diverse range of organisational cases across broadly internationally comparable selection criteria, while also taking into account the unique aspects of each HE system, reflecting relevant structural, social, economic, and political issues. International comparison is critical for the aims of this project, so we need case studies from each system. However, finite resources and time limitations mean that we can only focus on 2 case studies per country or region, and so cannot necessarily represent within system diversity as fully as we would like. But within each system, there is a need to balance typicality, i.e. institutions that may represent the system or part of it, and institutions that have intrinsic value or provide key insights into a particular issue within the country or region and how it manifests in the research space. This involves being culturally sensitive and understanding key issues, structures, and systems of governance to make an informed within-system selection. Attempting to balance selection criteria that will provide both the possibility of comparison through cross-case analysis and will ensure depth of understanding of organisational dynamics within each system is something that we're currently wrestling with. We're consequently combining the system-level analysis of policies and research with extensive scoping work to gain enough of an understanding to make a properly informed selection of cases. Can I have the next slide, please? So this kind of scoping fieldwork is focused particularly on analysis of relevant policy documents and digital resources to get a good understanding of the ways in which the different systems are structured and the kinds of issues that could be taken into account for selecting cases. This work has its own set of challenges, the first being the difficulty of working with materials that are embedded in their own complex political economies in a range of different languages. We're working with colleagues across the CGHE networks to help translate both the language and, most importantly, help us to understand the nuances of these different complex social and political contexts. We're also developing a cross-system advisory group to support this process and ensuring case selection takes into account political economies in a meaningful way. And of course, we're relying on critical friends to help us develop appropriate selection criteria. And this is where we hope that you'll be able to help us. So we're extremely lucky to have a very knowledgeable international audience today, and we'd be very grateful if you could share your ideas about what key considerations we should keep in mind for each system when selecting organisational case studies, bearing in mind the need to balance typicality against contextual richness. So it'd be fantastic if you could put your ideas in the chat. And I guess in the interest of time, I'll monitor the chat as things emerge and hand over to Xin.
Thank you, James. So if you have any thoughts, please feel free to leave them in the chat. Meanwhile, we'll proceed with the presentations. And I'll briefly introduce the third strand of the project, which explores the individual perspectives. The questions we ask about the individual perspectives are how the stakeholders describe and evaluate the importance given to the research in higher education context, particularly in relation to individual careers, organizational environments, the functions of higher education, and the sectoral policy. In addition, we have two questions that we ask. So the first one is, what are the organizational practices involved in ascribing importance to, incentivizing, and recognizing research in higher education institutions? And how do stakeholders experience them? And the second question relates to the comparisons of perspectives across different career stages, disciplines, types of institutions, systems, and sectors. The research approach will mainly be interviews at the selected case institutions. We'll conduct interviews with the following stakeholders, who include departmental heads, who will normally be senior academics and who are from different disciplines, and senior manager or research administrators, policy stakeholders, publishers, key industry partners, as well as early and mid-career academics. There will be several challenges, and some of them will be quite similar to what James had discussed, such as accessing research participants. And in addition, reflexivity is very important in our research project because we're all researchers ourselves under research assessment frameworks, but we're also conducting this research about research and interviewing researchers as well as stakeholders relevant to research practices. So we have multiple identities and stances ourselves. We'll need to navigate through so-called insider, outsider, or in-between perspectives ourselves during the project. And another challenge is keeping sensitive about the context. And this is also relevant to James' previous point about the nuances of the different systems. So we aim to be mindful of and sensitive to the contextual nuances of each system, institution, and the culture participants are in. This includes, for instance, as mentioned in the chat, the definitions of the research excellence and other key terms. We also aim to be mindful of individual features and characteristics of the participants that include their gender, racial identity, career stages, discipline, physical mental health conditions for indigenous academics in several systems. So now I would like to invite you to share your thoughts in the chat about what you think about the cultural sensitivity and what you think the research excellence means in your context. For the sake of time, we won't be able to recap in this presentation, but perhaps we could pick up the discussion later after the conference and then feedback to you in other forms.
Thank you very much, Xin. The questions are now in the chat as well. So the question about ensuring contextual sensitivity in the organizational and interview-based work, and also tailoring language and engaging respectfully with diversity. After the session, we would be looking very carefully at all of the contributions that you've kindly made, and we are planning to share some outcomes of this conversation with you via an email or a blog post, and there will be an opportunity to sign up for that later on, just near the end of the session. So 2-minute closing, run through some more research that we would like to share with you. these are two publishing projects that are in development at the moment. One's a report that we produced on the landscape of educational research in the UK, post-compulsory and compulsory, to the British Academy and Royal Society, and which is a very comprehensive account of the funded research and published research in the last 10 years in the UK. And the other, the Handbook of Meta Research, is a project that again brings together many disciplines to explore those 5 themes, perhaps a slightly unusual way of organizing research on research than one might be used to, but a way that we have found through conversations with the authors very productive. And across those themes, we want to engage with inclusive notions of research and with a dialogue between different forms and traditions of knowledge. And other work that we've produced can be accessed by everyone via a link which is now in the chat. We've produced a portfolio that summarizes this work and gives you links to how to access it, and we very much hope to hear from you in relation to any of those projects or any of those publications, or indeed any aspects related to the research project that we presented today. But I do want to take 30 seconds as well to mention something that is very important to all of us, and which are the beginnings of research that I am sure is going to make a really significant contribution to this field. So these are highlights of the work of some of the doctoral researchers who are working with us either individually or collectively as a team. And as you can see, they range from research culture and knowledge production in collaborations and knowledge alliances, all the way to aspects of epistemic injustice, emerging professions, and the development of doctoral education and publishing. The students have produced a gallery of posters based on their research, and again all of these posters and the contact details of each of the doctoral researchers involved are available to you from the link which is now in the chat. Thank you very much for engaging with our questions, and we very much look forward to hearing from you. Details of how to sign up to our mailing list for the project are also available in the chat now. And as I said, we are hoping to follow up on everything that's been contributed to this session in a blog post, which will be probably the first thing you will receive from us if you do join the mailing list. Thank you very much, and over to you, Janja, again. I think probably we have time for one or two of the questions that were posted.
Yes, thank you very much for this fascinating session, and thank you also to all of the participants for great comments and thoughts. We have a minute left, so I'll give the floor for one question. That's actually, I'll bring in Karin and David because they touch upon a similar topic, and I'll just read it out loud myself. So Karin asks, it would be interesting to see how your research results in the 6 countries compare with developing countries from sub-Saharan Africa, if you have considered extending the parameters of your research after this project. And David similarly asks about the peripheral countries. So I think we have time for you to reflect on that.
I think I'll get that started, and then colleagues, please chip in as well. And thank you both for these very, very important questions, and they are something that has been very much at the forefront of our thinking as well. So although we started with contexts where research assessment is formalized and it's been established for a fair amount of time, we are even in those contexts, we are very aware of the fact that there is cultural and epistemic diversity, and that there are, for example, indigenous takes on research and on higher education that we need need to consider very carefully and engage with respectfully in this work. So we will be starting small within the systems that we are considering, but we are hoping to develop over the next 3 years a conversation with partners from a wider range of countries, and Sub-Saharan Africa is a very good idea, and also we were thinking about Latin America too, and to develop this network so that we can explore the right language, right tools, and right approaches for beginning to understand the specific issues of these contexts and the kind of global dynamics of knowledge production and assessment within which they are embedded. So I don't know if colleagues would like to add anything.
For me, Alice, I think that one of the considerations that you said is testing the tools that we have in order to see whether it is possible to extend it to nations, peripheral nations, as well as one like Sub-Saharan Africa. From my perspective, from a bibliometric analysis, and this is something that we brought up in the presentation when we were talking about the selection of database, is the availability of data, and more importantly, the connection of the current research activity within these nations to a more global community of research practice. And this makes it very difficult. Language makes that very difficult, which is why we'll be piloting it in this project, but also availability and publishing of articles in languages that are not necessarily accessible to a larger group of people internationally make it very difficult to track it bibliometrically. But I'm sure the insights from this from this first round of analysis will definitely provide insights necessary for us to extend that analysis methodologically speaking, as well as to pick up any nuances related to context.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, colleagues, this brings us to the end. Thank you again, everyone, speakers and participants. Now we have two options. You can either go to the breakout session that will continue the discussion on this project with most of the speakers, or you could attend the next session that starts at 5:10 UK time with the title "Too Many Graduates Perpetuating or Challenging Inequalities." So the links to both sessions have been posted in the chat area, and hopefully see you in the breakout session to continue this wonderful discussion. Thank you. Bye.